Nearest store is more than 100 miles from where I'm standing, and I haven't gone hungry once since we got here. That's not luck. That's being smart. It's knowing exactly what I'm looking at before I ever put it in a pot. Because the root that looks near enough identical to a wild carrot can also be water hemlock, the deadliest plant on this whole continent. And there's no fixing that mistake once it's made. Hi, I'm Annie. Back east, food meant a counter and a scale, and a man behind it weighing out whatever I asked for. I never once thought about where any of it came from before it landed in my basket. Flour was just flour, meat was just meat, already cut, already wrapped, and I couldn't have told you which farm it came from if my life had depended on it. Out here, there's no counter, no scale, and no man behind either one. If I want to eat tonight, I've got to already know where tonight's meal is standing, growing, or hiding. And I've had to learn every bit of that knowledge myself, the hard way, one mistake at a time. Start with what's simply already here, growing whether I plant a single seed or not. Come spring, before the garden's given me anything at all, I'm out picking dandelion greens and wild asparagus, both of them free for the taking if you know the leaf. But that same family of plants is exactly where the danger I mentioned lives too. Wild carrots and water hemlock grow in the same damp ground near the same creeks, wearing near enough the same white flower. Get the two confused and dig up the wrong root, and you could be feeling the effects inside a quarter hour, with nothing anybody can do to undo it once it's started. So I dig carefully, and I check every root twice before it goes anywhere near my basket, no matter how many times I've done it before. Come summer and fall, there's wild fruit scattered through the timber, and enough nuts falling that a good afternoon's gathering fills a whole sack, and none of that carries a fraction of the same risk. There's syrup up in this land too, if you're patient enough for it. Come the first thaw, I tap the maples, same as everyone taught me, and boil that thin, watery sap down for hours over the fire until it's finally worth calling syrup. It takes a shameful amount of sap to make a small jar of the finished thing, but it's the only sweetness I've got out here that didn't cost me a single coin. There's a second kind of sweetness out here too, and finding it takes a real skill of its own. Bees don't announce where they're living, so you've got to earn it. Catch one at a puddle or a flower, follow her, straight line, back toward wherever her hive is hidden. You'll lose sight of her again and again through the trees, and you mark your path as best you can each time she disappears. Find that hollow trunk and you mark the tree. Then you leave it be until fall. That's a bee tree, and it's treated like real treasure out here because refined sugar is scarce and dear this far from anywhere, dearer than most folks back east would ever believe. Come autumn, you go back. Fell that marked tree, and if you've done the work right, you'll come away with gallons of honey and a good stock of wax besides. Some seasons, a few of the men around here will take a whole trip of it together, gone the better half of a week hunting bee trees, and come back with barrels of the stuff between them. I've never felled one myself, but I've traded eggs for a jar more than once, and I don't feel one bit of shame over it. My garden's a deliberate thing, entirely different from anything I forage or hunt down. Every seed in it either rode west with me in a little cloth sack or came from trading with another family who'd carried something I hadn't thought to bring, planned out months before it ever breaks the ground. And if there's one thing in that garden I'd never leave out, it's corn. It grows easy and generous in this ground, while flour stays dear and hard to come by, which makes it the real backbone of everything I cook. Ground down to meal, it's mush some mornings, hot cakes fried up quick on a skillet other mornings, and bread near every evening. What we don't eat ourselves goes to the hogs and the chickens, so not one kernel of it ever truly goes to waste. Which brings me to the hogs themselves. And this is the one part of feeding this family that costs me almost no effort at all. I don't pen them up or feed them by hand through most of the year. I simply turn them loose into the timber and let them go. A hog will root up nuts, roots, insects, whatever grubs and berries it can find, and thrive on it, fattening itself through the whole warm half of the year on food I never had to lift a finger to provide. Come the cold months, when I finally do call them in for slaughter, that hog's put on more foraging weight for itself than it ever would have penned up eating scraps I'd have had to gather. It's the one animal on this claim that mostly feeds itself, and I've come to think it's the closest thing to a bargaining this land has ever offered me. Now, when it comes to meat, that isn't exactly already living on my own yard. I'll tell you plainly. Out here, if it's got fur or feathers on it, it's very likely somebody's supper. Venison, rabbit, turkey, goose, duck, those are the everyday meats, the ones nobody blinks twice at. But I've eaten possum too, and raccoon, and I know families who've eaten badger and wild boar without a second thought. Even snake goes in the pot some seasons when nothing else has presented itself and a body's hungry enough to remember it's simply meat like any other. And it's not only what walks or flies either. Down at the creek, there's fish enough most days to make a decent supper of it, along with crayfish if you're patient enough to hunt them out from under the rocks. Squirrels trickier than you'd think, and this took me embarrassing long to learn. They're small and quick, and proper sized ball from a rifle will near enough obliterate the whole animal, leaving you precious little worth cooking. So the trick, and I do mean trick, is you don't aim for the squirrel at all. You aim for the bark just beneath its feet. The shock of that shot knocks it clean off the branch, stunned or dead, without a single piece of lead ever touching the meat. I heard once from a man who'd traveled with the mountain men out further west than I'll likely ever go myself, that Jim Bridger himself claimed cougars was the finest meat there was. Better than venison, better than anything. I've never had the chance to test his claim for myself, and I'm not entirely certain I want to. If you want to understand just how little this land holds back, though, you need to understand the prairie chickens. There are seasons when the birds are so thick across this prairie that a single hunter can bring home 25 or 50 of them in one day's work, without any particular skill or effort. I've heard tale of men who've taken as many as 200 birds in a single outing, and I still find that number hard to entirely believe, even having seen the flocks myself, thick enough to darken the grass when they rise all at once. They roost together in trees sometimes, which makes for the strangest hunting I've ever heard described. A boy with a decent aim can pick them off one at a time, starting with whichever bird sitting lowest on the branch, working his way upward, bird by bird, and the ones higher up won't even scatter until the shooting finally spooks the whole flock at once. Not everything comes from a gun or a garden either. Plenty of what ends up on my table came from a trade instead. I'll set aside extra wheat or corn or a hog more than my family needs and carry it to a neighbor or a passing trader for anything this land simply won't grow me.
Is this
Sugar,
a fair trade?
coffee, a length of good
For
cloth,
you, it
spools of
is.
thread. There's still an exchange happening, same as back east. The currency is just whatever your own hands manage to raise or shoot instead of coin. Here's the part of all this that actually takes the most skill, though, and it's got nothing to do with finding food at all. It's keeping what you've already found. A haunch of venison hanging in July will spoil before you've finished admiring it. So into the smokehouse it goes, hung over a slow fire of hickory or applewood for hours, sometimes days, until the smoke's dried and cured it enough to keep for months. Other cuts get rubbed down heavy in salt and packed into crocks and barrels. Sometimes they're sunk right down into a brine, sometimes sealed clean under a layer of melted lard so no air can reach the meat at all. Down in the root cellar, potatoes and carrots and turnips wait out the winter in the cool and the dark, same as they do every single year. Whether the summer that filled that cellar was a generous one or not. I think about the trail sometimes when I'm doing this work because the trail is where I learned just how quickly abundance can vanish. The farther west our company traveled, the scarcer the game got, the scarcer the berries, the fruit got, until we were leaning hard on whatever we'd had the sense to pack and preserve before we'd ever left. I've heard worse stories than ours, too. Families further along that trail boiling the leather straps off their own harness just to have something to chew. So here's what 100 miles from the nearest counter has taught me. It isn't luck that kept this family fed, and it isn't luck keeping this family safe either. Every root I dig still gets checked twice against the plant that could kill us. Every single time. The same as it did the very first spring I learned the difference. That habit hasn't worn thin with practice. These years out here have only sharpened it.